Thank you all for joining us today. To begin with, I grew up on the East Coast of the US in the New York City area. Very early on, as a child, I had a number of precognitive dreams. Those were my first so-called paranormal experiences. And I say paranormal because we don't know how normal they are, because usually we can't talk about it. And when I did talk about it, I found out very quickly that it was wise not to talk about it too much. But these precognitive dreams did give me a sense that in the theater of life, there's stuff that goes on backstage, that there are other levels of reality that interpenetrate ours and connect with ours, and that probably more people have access to them than are willing to admit it. Anyway, so in my teens, I became connected with some documentary filmmakers in New York. They were doing pioneering work at the time. This is the early 1960s. And excuse me. So I became enamored of filmmaking and film production and made a career out of that, which endured until now. I'm still doing freelance film work. But I sort of lived a parallel life throughout my lifetime of an abiding interest in the greater reality. And so on the one hand, I'm a very grounded, practical person. And that's why in my attempts to understand the so-called paranormal, my prejudice is to bring scientific inquiry into it. And normally we don't think about science and the paranormal as being in the same bag, but and I think that's because science has gotten a bad rap in being equated with materialism. And this, of course, started in the Renaissance when science broke off from the church and became its own thing. And in its pursuit of verification, of testing reality, it focused on the material world, and that's perfectly understandable. But as time went on, and certain phenomena started breaking through into our awareness. For example, the near-death experience, which had been obviously going on forever, but only as recently as the 1970s or so has it been acknowledged as a genuine phenomenon that has begged to be investigated scientifically. And this attracted a number of researchers and authors to the field. It resulted in the creation of the IANDS, International Association of Near-Death Studies, which is, I think they have chapters in every continent except Antarctica now. And then beyond the exploration into near-death studies, beginning in the 1950s, you had the birth of instrumental transcommunication. And that's something that's interested me for a long time now, because it presents such hard, incontrovertible evidence. It started actually in the 1950s when tape recorders became consumer items for the first time. And occasionally, people would hear voices, strange little voices on their tapes that didn't belong there. And at first, these voices were dismissed in terms of oh, the machine is picking up a radio station, and that sort of thing. And so, at least in the United States, there was very little interest in pursuing this on any kind of scientific basis. But in Europe, it was different. A man by the name of Friedrich Jürgensen, who was a well-known Swedish, he was an actor and a painter and a filmmaker, a multi-talented individual. And he went out one night with his new tape recorder to record nocturnal bird sounds for a documentary he was doing. And when he played back the tape, in the spaces between the bird sounds, he heard faint voices discussing nocturnal bird sounds, which he thought was quite a coincidence. Long story short, this gave rise to his lifelong investigation into this phenomenon. The second thing he heard on his tapes was the voice of his mother, calling him by his childhood nickname. And that turns out to be a pattern with people who start practicing the electronic voice phenomenon, first EVP, that they very often hear very evidential material from their family, from their parents, and very often the childhood nickname is sort of the key to that, because obviously very few other people would know that. Anyway, Jurgensen's work was followed by that of Konstantin Raudova, who was a Latvian psychologist and researcher. He then went off and did his own research. And by the time he passed in 1974, he had recorded between 60 and 70,000 of these anomalous voices on his tapes. He published a book and a phonograph record that contained quite a number of these responses to. He would just ask a question and the answers would come through his tape recordings. So this became a little known but very sort of firmly anchored process of investigation, because you can't make this stuff up. This practice eventually filtered down to the grassroots, where quite a number of interested people are routinely communicating with the other side through their recording systems, cell phone apps, smartphone apps, and so on. And so it's become a practical means of communication with the other side. It's not always 100% reliable, but we don't really know what enhances or inhibits this sort of communication. Some people think it's the phase of the moon. Others have other theories about it. I think we're a ways off from understanding how it all works, but it does work, and it's practical for many people. So in addition to instrumental transcommunication, what I'm calling in my book the landscape of afterlife research includes obviously near-death experience research, reincarnation research, mental mediumship research and practice, physical mediumship research and practice, out-of-body experience research and practice. And I say practice because many people, again, do this as a practical exercise in understanding and working with their own consciousness. And then there are the diverse avenues of research that are represented by the winning Bigelow Institute essays, which you all probably are familiar with. The next chapter in my book is called Supportive Studies in Related Phenomena. And those include the abilities of autistic savants, who, as you may know, may have a diminished brain capacity, diminished brain material, and yet they have access to information seemingly out of nowhere. Unbelievably complex mathematical solutions will just come to them like that. And this somewhat parallels the notion that we're finding out with psychedelic substances, for example, which expand our consciousness as a function of diminished brain activity. So this tends to support the notion that the brain is a reducing valve or a filtering device, or whatever metaphor you want to use, but that it imposes limitations on our awareness, which are obviously very practical in this physical world, but they do limit our sense of reality. The folks like autistic savants and so on give us a clue about the nature of the brain and the purpose of the brain. Another supportive study is that of terminal lucidity, which you've all probably heard about, and this is the phenomenon where just prior to death, folks with perhaps severe brain injury or severe brain damage experience a short period of time of perfectly normal awareness and communication. And this, of course, makes no sense from the materialistic perspective. And it suggests that, in some sense, the afflicted brain is getting out of the way and allowing a more normal communication process to take place before life ceases completely. Another related phenomenon is, which is now called the shared death experience, as part of the spectrum, where those who are in attendance when someone passes will apparently join them in their journey to the other side. They will share in the experience, at least part way into the afterlife. And this is something that has probably been experienced by generations and generations of medical people, relatives of dying individuals, and is only being really recognized now. I once, some years ago, met some nurses who worked in a children's cancer ward, and they had observed the passing of quite a number of children, and they confided to me that most of the medical staff in those wards have had many experiences like this with children just before they pass, or as they pass, or after they pass. And these phenomena are apparently well known to people who work in recovery rooms in hospitals, post-surgical recovery rooms. Now, one time I was going to do a documentary about these folks, and it was going to be titled, "Don't Tell the Doctor." And because the doctors are usually the last people in the world who get to hear about these things, and generally they don't want to know about them. There are exceptions, but mostly this sort of thing is taboo within the medical profession, as you all probably realize. Another aspect, another one of the supportive studies is in the area of psychedelics, which, as I think I mentioned, seem to expand our awareness as a function of diminished brain activity. Then there are things like the placebo effect. Everyone knows about the placebo effect, but how does that work? Western medicine, on the one hand, it denies the power of the mind to influence our health, and on the other hand, clinical trials and so forth are designed to carefully eliminate the placebo effect in its statistical analyses, because tests of miracle drugs need to avoid something else there that's going to do a miracle cure, and very often that is the placebo effect itself. And so it's avoided, or at least soft pedaled in the medical community as a kind of an anomaly, but it seems to reinforce what we're beginning to learn about consciousness. And let's see, another aspect of supportive studies would be things like lucid dreaming, which needs no further introduction. It's from my perspective, lucid dreaming is a really healthy preparation for certain levels of the afterlife, where our they say attention and intention determine the nature of our perceived reality. And that's how it works in lucid dreaming. Those who are adept at it can essentially consciously create their own reality in the dream state. And so a lot more attention is being paid now to this. Many more people are doing this as a practice, which can be done as a practice, a conscious practice. And see what else. Of course, there's precognition and presentiment, which have been studied, have been the subject of laboratory studies, where it has been demonstrated graphically that we can become aware of a certain stimulus before it's actually applied or given to us. Clairvoyance and remote viewing. Of course, we all know about the United States military and CIA's exercises in remote viewing and research that was done on that some years ago out of Stanford Research Institute. That's public knowledge now, as you probably all know. And there's a practice, interesting practice that's sort of on the fringe of remote viewing called map dowsing. And that's where a psychic or a dowser can find lost objects on a map. I have personal experience with this. A friend of mine was a musician, and she had it was a harp that she played, and the harp was stolen in the city of Oakland here in the San Francisco Bay Area some years ago. And so this girl's mother hired a very well-known map dowser to try to find the stolen instrument. And he nailed it down to within a 2-block radius within the San Francisco Bay Area, which is quite geographically and population-wise quite huge. So he narrowed it down to within a 4-block area, and he said to the girl's mother, "I just put up posters in this 4-block area and offer a reward." And sure enough, they got the heart back within a week. And then there's researches in telepathy, which you probably all know about. And I think telepathy is kind of a general term that encompasses a number of the things that I just mentioned. So that's sort of the content of the 3rd chapter in my book. Chapter 4, which is the shortest chapter in the book, is called "What is the Consciousness Code?" And that's the subtitle of my book, Space, Time, and the Consciousness Code. And I could actually read that chapter for you because it is so short. Let me bring it up here. Yeah. Chapter 4, what is the consciousness code? It's trendy to call things codes these days. But broadly speaking, a code can be anything whose meaning or very existence is wholly or partly hidden or obscure. This may be deliberate, as with encrypted information. Or it may be a natural code, such as a DNA code, the shape of a plant's leaves, or the language of a particular bird species. Some things may be hidden by possessing qualities that our senses are not physically equipped to perceive. Examples include radio waves, ultraviolet light, the air on a clear day, deep seismic rumbles, and ultrasonic dog whistles. Other things in perfectly plain sight may be effectively invisible to us, because our culture has no particular interest in them or is motivated to ignore or deny them. These can be difficult or impossible to recognize. And what we can't recognize, we obviously can have no motivation to decode. Consciousness is an excellent example of a code hiding in plain sight. On the one hand, nothing should be more immediate or obvious to us than our own consciousness. On the other, our materialistic culture puts enormous unspoken pressure on us to ignore it or to explain it away as an illusory byproduct of neurological functioning. As a result, our chances of decoding it, laying bare its remarkable nature, properties, and potentials, have tended to be slim. So we end up like moviegoers, absorbed in a captivating adventure or love story, while being oblivious to the screen, the projector, the vast community of talented professionals behind the scenes. They don't exist in our reality unless we happen to be filmmakers or students of filmmaking who know what to look for and why to bother looking in the first place. Perhaps to make better movies? As we have now seen, where honest science has stepped up to the plate and begun to decode and demystify consciousness, better movies, a richer appreciation of reality, more profound and beautiful experiences, and a healthier, more insightful relationship to life and death appear to be an inevitable result, coming soon to a realm near you. So, and then I have a number of quotes here at the end of the chapter. My favorite one is this, from a Vedanta teacher. Each of us creates our own reality, and if you disagree with me, it proves my point. So, I seem to have taken up my half hour of fame here. So, are there any questions, or I can quote more from the book if you want, but I'll be really glad to take questions at this point. Okay, part 3 of the book is about the nature of the afterlife, and the chapters 9 through 12 are titled, "What's it made of? Where's it located? How does it work? And what's it like?" Oh, and then what's it for? So, first of all, to my sensibility, the afterlife is essentially you might call it a holographic reality made of consciousness. And consciousness is its substance, its underlying substance. But it does not work in a spatial way, the way our three-dimensional physical reality works. The nature of a hologram is that any part of it exists in some sense in the whole. And so as souls, and I use this, I'll take a step back here and mention that I use the metaphor of the ocean as the greater reality. And that the nature of the soul is kind of like, imagine a surfer's wave in that ocean. It has form, it has identity, it is distinct but not separate. And this is a very important question of distinction versus separation. Distinction is not separation. It's simply it's the arising of form within the formless potential of the whole. And it is, as souls have endurance. They have growth potential. They can become more sophisticated over time through physical lifetimes, through other experiences. They remain part of the whole. Our physical reality and our senses, particularly, give us a very particular view of things. When people ask me, they say there's a veil that separates this side from the other side. What is the veil? As far as I can tell, the veil is our senses. It's our physical senses, which are tuned to a very, very narrow slice of reality. We already know that animals who have a different sensory balance than we do, live in a somewhat different universe than we do. Dogs live in a world of smells that we have no perception of. That's an easy one. But what else do animals and other creatures perceive that we don't? Since we don't have that facility of language with them, we don't know. But I think we have to keep our minds open about it. So anyway, our senses being the veil. And of course, when we drop our senses, when our bodies expire, the veil is removed, obviously. So at that point, we enter into this holographic universe, you might call it. But we remain creative in that context. We're able to manipulate at least our own perceptions of things, and perhaps the perceptions of others to some extent. When we're all told that when we pass over, we may be met by dead relatives and see them either as we expect to see them or as they project themselves to us. And that doesn't mean that they put on a literal physical appearance, but that their projection is perceived by us, and then we mentally project it outward as if they were actually out there. But my sense of it is that we're all in the same space together. And the distinction between myself and my dead grandmother is only a relative distinction. That our physical appearance, our voice, to the extent that the voices are heard, are kind of symbols of our identity. But I think in the afterlife, we perceive our own self and others' selves on a much deeper level. It's a universal experience both from afterlife communications and from near-death experiencers, that an atmosphere of love is fairly universal to most levels of the afterlife. And the longest chapter in my book is about language, and I got a thing about that, because our language, we say words like love. That doesn't really communicate what those, and those who do come back from the afterlife say, well, we're using the word love, but it's a very, it's the best we can do. The actual experience is so far beyond that. Anyway, I think we're all familiar with the notion that the afterlife is a larger framework of existence than our physical life, that it endures over an infinite span of time, or time is probably not the right word, because eternity is not just an infinite extension of time. It's something completely different. And over that timeless span, if you will, we learn and we grow and we adapt and we communicate in ways that are increasingly, I would say, wise and transparent and loving and unitive in the best sense of the word. So I feel like I'm rambling a bit here, but I hope that well, that's a whole other question. I would say we just need to keep doing what we're doing and
Right.
and stay on track and stay steady with it. In terms of the particulars, I don't know if there are any more fields of research to be discovered if we simply carried forth with what we already know about the greater reality. I think slow and steady could win the race here. I can read the epilogue of my book. It's called "What Do We Know and Where Do We Go From Here?" It's fairly short. If the evidence offered in this book is valid, the existence of a greater reality, a matrix in which our awareness and sense of self apparently dwell between our physical lives, and in which our entire physical universe may itself be embedded, appears to be beyond question. And I'm suggesting there that our physical universe is a subset of this greater reality. The fact that this matrix exists beyond the reach of our narrow senses, our current scientific instruments, and our language does not rule it out. Meanwhile, mounting positive evidence for its existence rattles the gates and gatekeepers of our academic, scientific, and cultural institutions. Breakthroughs are being made in psychic and electronic communication with the other side. Stringent academic research is being conducted into reincarnation, mediumship, terminal lucidity, and other previously neglected fields of inquiry. Newly developed or rediscovered techniques and practices are building bridges between this world and the next. All these and more are inexorably forcing the question of an afterlife into the light of day, following centuries of passive neglect and active avoidance or suppression by our dominant academic, scientific, and religious institutions. This book is only one small contribution to the emerging flood of science-based afterlife-related literature. Turn to the resource section and recommended reading list for several suggestions, the most important being to read as widely as you can and see which perspectives mean the most to you. And if you are so inclined, gently broach the subject to others. You may be surprised at how many will welcome sharing their own thoughts and experiences relating to the afterlife. I hope this rising tide of awareness maintains its momentum toward a courageous, responsible approach to answering the eternal questions surrounding the deeper experience and meaning of life and death.
Yeah, Daniel, I wanted to say what a pleasure it is to speak with you. You're the go-to place when folk ask me for a book or a film about this subject, and pass on your films, and everybody is very impressed by them. I'd like to ask about EVP, which I know is a special subject of yours, and I'm wondering, in all your experience, do you find that mediumship in a person is an advantage to EVP, or is it something that you feel that anybody could do? I often get the feeling that certain people who get good results are probably a little more mediumistic than others. Would you like to give us a clue about that?
Well, I'd give you a clue if I had one. We don't know is the answer. Whether natural mediumship enhances instrumental transcommunication or not, I don't think there have been enough studies. I don't even know if studies have been designed to determine that. I suppose you'd have to gauge a person's natural mediumship ability through some protocol that allows them to exercise that. And if they don't feel they have any, it would be a bit of a challenge to set up the kinds of controlled research that would need to be done. My sense of it, and again, this is just my opinion, is that the desire to communicate and having an emotional bond with a particular individual on the other side is what will most facilitate instrumental transcommunication of any kind. There are conditions that we have no conception of that probably enhance or inhibit the process. Some people say that ITC works better during the waxing phase of the moon. Maybe it does, but I don't know of any actual research that's been done to determine that. So I think unless and until someone can get the funding to do the necessary research, we'll just have to do the best we can with this. In my book, I do get into the question of involuntary mediumship, which is something that I think many of us who have been very close to people who've passed have experienced to one extent or another. When my late partner Jane passed in 2007, following her passing, I experienced a number of quite unmistakable signs of her presence and communication and so on. And I don't feel like I have any particular mediumistic talent. So this is a very kind of slippery question to answer, and I think that's probably the best I can do.
Yeah, so EVPs, NDEs, reincarnation, mediumship, such a broad spectrum. Can you point to one story or one experience that you go to convince others of your confidence in the afterlife?
Well, I don't go around trying to convince people. That's part of my answer. What I very often do is to ask people if they themselves have had experiences which they have felt or suspected might have entailed some communication with the other side. I try to avoid any sort of what you might call ideological approach to any of this. I'm not fond of ideology in general. I prefer direct experience and where it's appropriate, clean scientific inquiry. So if I have a sense that someone has had certain experiences, I might take a bit of a risk and broach certain things to them, but I don't have a fixed routine. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you, Daniel, and thank Tim Coleman for the wonderful work you've done in the Afterlife Experience Sub-School. And judging by the difficulties people, I'm from Brazil, right? And I was interviewed by a movie maker from Sao Paulo for an introduction of the Brazilian version of this documentary, the one you made with, I think both you made together with Tim Coleman, I guess. Mm. And the point is, it's so difficult to put these things forward that when this documentary was about almost 4,000 views, 400,000 views on YouTube, there was a disagreement between Tim Coleman and this movie maker, and they removed it from YouTube. You know, things always end up like that. And I know I deal with mediumship for 40 years. I've dealt with mediumship for 40 years in my country. So lots of evidence. And I thank you so much for the wonderful work. But the first time I saw that documentary, I saw that was not only the content was good, but was very well put. Very well filmed.
Which documentary are you speaking of?
I'm talking about the Afterlife Investigation. Skull Experiment. Yeah, Skull Experiment. Yes.
Right. There are actually, I should mention.
Two.
There are actually three.
Three. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's Calling Earth, which is about ITC, and there are two versions of the Skull film.
Yeah.
One is called the Afterlife Investigations, and that's the one that Tim and I worked together for a period of time, and then we each went off on our own.
Okay.
Tim edited the Afterlife Investigations,
I see.
which focuses on skull, but it also contains a bunch of other
Marcello Bacci
elements.
and so on and so
Right,
forth.
right. So it incorporated elements of the ITC film.
Mm-hmm.
But Tim and I, before we went our own ways, together we edited a version of the Skull film, which is called Skull: The Afterlife Experiment,
Mm-hmm.
and it focuses exclusively on skull. And we've now put it up on Vimeo as the director's cut. And this is the one that Tim and I agreed upon. So, and Tim was gracious enough to let me put this on Vimeo. So that's the one I generally recommend. Also, Tim's version employed a professional narrator. And the one that I preferred is the one that Tim narrated. I thought he did an even better job himself. So I'm sorry about the confusion of these films. And go watch all three of them if you want.
Yes, Robin for himself sent to me when he was living in Spain. He sent to me the copy of the second one. And I was always thinking, why hasn't the second one become public, Because I think this is a humanitarian situation. That the work you've done, you and Tim have done, it's very, very good, and many people all over the world are in need of this kind of knowledge. So it's so important. It's not a matter, of course, it's your profession. You live on this, but these things sometimes have to come a little bit ahead of our personal interests. And I was worried. I was even worried about Tim Coleman when he was having difficulties to come to an agreement with this guy in São Paulo, because I said that spiritually I was kind of made me inspired that, look, this guy has to put this out, that it's for his own good, That's what I wanted to ask you, to congratulate you for this wonderful work. And humanity just says thanks, right? And I say thank together. Right?
Thank you very much. The film business, like any other profession, has its ups and downs, its personalities, and its business considerations as well. And not everyone will always agree on everything. This is one reason why my original intent, which has turned out to be the case, is I wanted to simply give the films away and not charge any admission for them. And so Tim and I essentially did these films out of our own pocket. We got a small private grant, which covered part of the costs. But we worked together very economically, and
did a wonderful job, even if this,
Can I just flag just before we go to other questions? There's very little on the skull experiment now online apart from your video. I've been constantly looking for resources, and it's all just been forgotten and disappeared. If it hadn't been for what you did, all of that could have been lost. I just think that's really important.
Yes,
I'm afraid you're right.
Yeah.
The first book that was written, called The Skull Experiment, was very well written. It's been out there for years, and I hope people are still reading it. And Robin Foy, who was one of the main experimenters, published a book called Witnessing the Impossible, which consists of his personal notes on each of the 500 skull sessions. The book is thick, and I haven't read through the whole thing. It's just an amazingly complete and an astonishing read, but no one knows about it. So I'm just let's face it, we may be rock stars in our own field, but we're not yet rock stars in the world at large. Hopefully that will happen at some point. What we're beginning to discover and to suspect and to practice will come out of the closet. I'm sure there's a great deal going on in the closet, but it's a tough call especially if you have professional commitments professional or political or whatever commitments you have in your life that aren't very flexible when it comes to this material. People are still in the dark in many cultures. Ours, I think, maybe the English-speaking world may be ahead of the rest in having access to more of this material than others do. But I have not done a global survey, so I don't know. That's just a guess.
Thank you. Yes. Dan, I've waited for years to tell you how much I loved Calling Earth and the hundreds of people I have sent that link to. It's helped me enormously when I first learned about ITC in 2016. And Vicki Talbot was someone who really helped me. I know she's a good friend of yours. It's so integral. Your work and this presentation are just fantastic. I look forward to your book very much. And I will say another thing dogs do is they can see. My little dog, Lily, is the one that let me know there was orb festivals going on in my bedroom at night because she can see these things and gets crazy, jumping all over the place. And eventually, I'd been recording EVPs for a few years. It dawned on me that maybe she could see something I couldn't. So I put a video camera on and I've got some wonderful displays. So that, and I also, to answer the gentleman who asked about EVP and mediumship, another thing I think is developing your ear, which I think happens over time. You just can hear things quicker and easier if you put in the time to listen, which Aaron and I spent a lot of time in the past trying to help people learn how to get started. And we found that a lot of people didn't want to take the time to sit and listen to the recordings. As you know, listening to it can get tiresome to people. So there's a work involved, but I think if you really want that communication, like you said, you really have someone you want to talk to and them to you, your ear will develop, it will develop. People should just try it. As you know, and nothing is as much proof as when it happens for you. Mm-hmm. So I just want to thank you for your contribution to this field. It's extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes. I think, didn't we meet at a conference in Scottsdale some years ago?
I would have remembered if I met you. I mean, I've been at conferences for AREI and Helping Parents Heal, but I don't think I met you because once I learned of that documentary and saw it, you were very significant. So just, I don't know, maybe, but I'm glad to meet you now.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Sherry. Likewise.
Yeah, on the subject of what the afterlife is like, I'm looking for evidence that indeed the idea that the basis of reality of consciousness is love, and that the other side isn't just like this side. In talking especially to materialists, I frequently get, there can't possibly be a God, look at all of the misery. And, I get pretty cynical myself, not so much about our possibilities, but the fact that who and what's in charge here is not love. And what's the evidence that what's in charge ultimately is love? I know that's a big question, but, I just want to throw that out.
It's a very good question, and I think a lot of these kinds of questions, unfortunately, are laden with presumptions. And the longest chapter in my book is about language and how language is such an intractable minefield in this area. We say words like God. Well, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to someone else? We can't, as I say in the book, you can't stuff 1,000 pounds of consciousness into the 5-pound bag of language. It just doesn't work. And I think we need to acknowledge that before we can generally make more progress in this area. It's not that we can't use language. Obviously, we've got to use it in our daily lives. But I think we also need to be skeptical of it. That it doesn't, it can be more of an impediment than anything else. And I think that to the extent that we can move toward direct experience and away from language, that the kinds of things that we're seeking will become more and more apparent to us. As to the question of, why this world is so screwed up, and if there is a loving God, why don't we know about it? Well, if you turn things around and suggest that each of us is, as it were, a cell in the brain of God, some people put it, then the question is, what are we doing about it? Now, obviously, the only thing we can really control is ourselves, and we can only make an example of ourselves in the world and radiate what we are. And that doesn't mean that we should never be involved in politics or education or any of these fields. Of course not. We need to do what we can. But primarily, the world is made out of us. And to the extent that we can mature ourselves, mature our own consciousness, whether we're here or on the other side or on some other planet, matters less. We take us with us wherever we go. And I think to the extent that we can grow, be in touch with our own loving nature, and infuse everything we do with that nature, to that extent, I think we're doing what we can. I think obviously creating a new consensus reality is important. I think that's something we're all struggling with as a group. But it all begins with each of us. And, that may sound a little simplistic, but that's my view and my experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know we all want the ultimate solution to immediate global enlightenment, and I totally sympathize with that need.
What I'm also looking at is what's the avenue to bravery in the face of forces that are not loving, if we can't be in touch enough with this love. We're just going to run and hide and not do anything here to change things. I don't know if that's making any sense, but
you're asking. It does. You're asking questions I think we've all asked, and if I had an easy answer, I would give it to you right now. Believe me. If anyone else here has an easy answer, let's hear it.
Or even a difficult one.
Or even a difficult one, right? Right, a difficult one. Yeah, sure. That's probably more like it, but. I think we have to begin where we are and be who we are. Whatever outward path we choose, whatever action we choose in the world, it's where we come from is the most important part of that, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Firstly, I want to say thank you, and it's exciting to get to hear you speak today, and your book sounds really like it covers so much that I won't have to recommend like 10 books to people. I can recommend one. So thank you. And what I want to ask is if you have thought about something, and if you haven't thought, I'm just curious about your opinion, because I think what you said, you believe that there isn't really a veil, that it's just beyond our senses, that the spirit people are right here, but it's beyond our senses and our physical senses. And what I end up thinking about a lot that confuses me is the vastness of outer space and how the spirit world relates to that, because there are so many theories like that. The spirit world is only for Earth, a lot of people think. Some people think, a lot of people think that there are ETs there. But I guess my curiosity is more about, does space even exist for spirits in the afterlife?
That's an excellent question. I think one answer is that when we use the word space, that by definition expresses our human conception of space as seen through our physical senses. When we die, we leave our physical senses behind. So the nature of reality is going to look very different. We're going to be aware of and sensitive to other aspects of reality besides what we call time, space, and matter. It's basically an apocalypse, meaning an uncovering, an unveiling. And it's literally an unveiling in that when we lose our physical senses, the veil is gone. Now, as far as space is concerned, physical space, I suppose you could call it a subset of the greater reality. There are maybe 1 million parallel physical universes. We don't know. We do know that many who report in from the afterlife speak of traveling in space as we normally understand it. And that may be the case. They also may have access to other parallel spaces, another matrix of reality. We don't know. We're in a very limited, confined reality, and our language reflects that. So I think it's fun and valuable to speculate about these things. If there's an ultimate answer, I suppose it's that there are no limits to anything ultimately. That all of creation on every level is a creation of consciousness or mind. And that if consciousness or mind or God or whatever you want to call it gets bored creating one reality, there's always an unlimited number of other realities you can create because consciousness has no fixed parameters. It's like sculptor's clay or an artist's blank canvas of infinite extent. Then there's time. We reckon time by rotations of the earth and the tick-tock of clocks and other oscillations and celestial motions and so on. And when you're free of that, there are other possibilities about how you reckon sequences of events, or what is an event. We talk about events, but when does an event actually start? A given event actually start and end, and that can be a very subjective definition. So ultimately, it's one continuous process, and it's chopped up or divided into time frames or whatever by the observer of these things. You and I may agree that an event has occurred, but we might not agree on when it actually started and when it actually ended. You can say every event was caused by everything prior to it that goes all the way back in time. We don't, so these are our notions about how time is divided up by events are more of a practical convenience than any kind of absolute truth. And, what I'm saying may sound a little slippery, but I think what it comes down to ultimately is that we as conscious beings, as a chip off the old block or a wave in the ocean, are responsible for creating our own reality. And that includes our sense of time, when an event begins and ends, where space begins and ends. It's like a work of art, basically. And I think it's a work of art on many, many levels. And even some of the darkest things we can imagine are works of dark art, you might say, because our consciousness on some level, in some way, has been responsible for them. And you can rationalize dark and evil things by saying, well, this is part of the cosmic play and so on. I don't have any definitive opinions about that. I think that's also very subjective. You get into political arguments with people, and the other side is always doing is the evil and dark part, and we're the light part.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Daniel. It just sounds like the further in we go, the bigger it's getting. So a very large part of the various communities who were involved in some books that I helped manifest seemed comfortable in accepting being called scientist, for lack of a better word. So I just wanted to acknowledge first the infinite diversity of dimensions beyond this one we're currently sharing. Do you have a sense of what scientists, quote, science and scientists are like in what we're conveniently for now calling the afterlife, particularly those who have contacted us or are contacting us or trying to contacting us using what they might call scientific ways and means? My sense in the past is that just some what seems to be a very simple table tipping seance involves an incredible amount of technology on the other side going on. They've shared that a lot of the interesting things that we see are really just side effects of their own experiments, and they've learned to use them as kind of bells and whistles to keep us interested and amused in some kind of a way. But have you had a sense of what science is, or what a scientist is outside of our science and scientist?
Well, it's a very good question, and all very good questions that you brought up. To me, science is basically organized curiosity, and it could take many forms. And science in different disciplines has its own means and methods, and so on. But basically, I think the phrase organized curiosity fits it best. Science is open-ended. The specific sciences design their own procedures that fit their particular discipline in the manner of collecting evidence, testing it, so on. But I think the main thing about science is, whether it's here or on the other side, is that science is a continually evolving process. It's a continually evolving expansion of awareness. And I think we've all heard that scientists on this side often attribute their discoveries to inspiration they can't explain. We've also been told that scientists on the other side make it a point of trying to infuse certain ideas into the minds of working scientists here. I do need to mention something about instrumental transcommunication in this context. I work with a team of mediums. They're quite extraordinary, and you can find some of their work on a website that we have created called cosmicvoices.network. One word, cosmicvoices.network. And these mediums, in private sessions, we have had conversations with Konstantin Raudova, whose name you recognize from my film. His attitude has been that we don't have time to mess around with ITC. What I mean by this is not to denigrate it, or not to minimize it as a proof of concept, as a proof of the other side. That's very important. And in terms of the communication that needs to go on between this side and the other side, for us to make the kinds of to work cooperatively with the other side, that it would be more economical and more effective to develop our own mediumship talents. I know that's a challenging proposition, and that folks who are focused on ITC may feel kind of slighted by this. But I didn't take this as any kind of minimizing the nature of ITC, but just seeing it in its proper place as a proof. But the actual communication that must go on, and I think people who've done ITC would agree with this. It's not a great vehicle for a lot of detailed information. It's inconsistent. I mean, it's fun and it's amazing and it's important. But what comes through again is more evidence of the existence of the afterlife. And that in and of itself is very important. But there's also apparently information that wants to come through that that's more detailed than ITC can handle at this point. And I'm mentioning that because I think it's important.
Yeah. So like this.
Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, sure. As I'm thinking too of the Skull Group's very intense interplay with scientists who were trying to give them some technological ways and means to enhance the information coming through, to the point where they actually said, eventually we're going to create a portal where we can just come in and sit down and talk to you about what's going on, that kind of a thing. But I'm just wondering, I don't see a lot of interplay between scientists on this side and scientists on that side. It makes me wonder, are there protocols that vastly different than, say, what we call scientific protocols here? I suspect, yeah, probably.
Well, if there were a lot of scientific interplay, how would we know about it? If someone is a working scientist today, they'd be hard pressed to confess to this sort of insanity, right? So that's, the whole emotional and sociological aspect of this is maybe one of the most important things we need to overcome.
One thing that has come through to me several times is that there's concern that the fantastic results that could be achieved interdimensionally between ours and theirs, that there are people here who would try to capitalize on it. And they're not interested in capitalizing on it.
Right. And thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, not so much a question. Well, thank you for this. This has been very interesting. I would like to piggyback on the word love and the expressions of words, and that language does seem to be a barrier, and that there's so many different elements of love and different kinds of love. And it seems that our communication causes more conflict and struggles, and it can be our own worst enemy. So I guess my question is, how do we teach our younger generations, just how do we promote the afterlife and just the magnificent of that word love? Does that make sense? Like how can...
Yeah, it does indeed. I actually, pardon me, but I think afterlife is itself a misleading term.
I do too.
I think it's useful in that we're all going to go there, and I think that's an important thing to communicate for people who don't want to think about it. We're all going there. We also came from there. And that's why I think the term afterlife is very limiting and misleading. I prefer to use the term the greater reality. And
okay, I'm just obsessed with it. But how do society has put us, we're our own worst enemy when it comes to death. Death. It just triggers in me that you're supposed to grieve and be sad and not believe in the different religions. It just an expert like you, just how do you word it to begin to advance society into a better understanding of what reality really is or is not?
Well, society is made out of people, and I don't know any way to do it other than what I've been doing my little piece of here, doing the films,
educate,
the book, and hanging out with friends, and strengthening our resolve to stay on the track. Yeah, it's true. And I get this in the introduction to my book. I get way into this whole question of materialism as the de facto religion of our planet, and how damaging it is to us, and how it's like the sea in which we swim here. It's just taken for granted. And if I had the magic formula, you'd be the first to know it.
Thank you.
But the fact that it is a question that just won't go away, I think, is very important. And I think we each have to do our own part, whether it's making movies or writing or speaking or helping to break the taboo by maybe risking asking people, have you ever had such and such an experience? And not pushing it, but just asking. I used to do this when I was very involved in UFO research for quite a long time, and I would ask people, have you ever seen a UFO? And they'd say, oh, no. Oh, wait a minute. There was this thing that happened when I was 14 years old, and then the whole story comes tumbling out.
Right.
So I guess
it's just there's just I'm sorry I interrupted. I've just looked to try to find in my area groups or a way to get the word out, and I get shut down. Like you had said earlier, that, a scientist isn't going to open themselves up to the ridicule of it. And I just would love to be a part of a movement to open this up, before I leave here and come back again to, get the word out that there's so much more, so much more.
Well, maybe you will.
Thank you.
The fact that you're asking the question, maybe some inspiration will strike you from somewhere, and you'll come up with a whole new approach that takes a different tack and maybe works in a different way.
There you go. Beam me up, Scotty. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. This is such a wonderful talk and opportunity to hear about your research and your book, which I will be ordering. So I agree with everything. I'm actually a physician by training. Formerly an agnostic, if not atheist, but I became a medium through an awakening, and I've been developing my mediumship. It's mental mediumship. And it's been quite a journey because I'm a skeptic, a big skeptic, and sometimes I don't even believe myself, but the evidence is absolutely overwhelming that we survive. And I guess I would like to see more people develop their mediumship. I think a lot of people have this ability, but we are still being silenced and shamed. I know for myself, I have not come out of the closet yet. I am in the spiritual closet because I'm around people who are very materialistic, very successful, but very materialistic. I think a movie would help. And you would really have to film the best of the best. I have seen both amazing, excellent mediums, and I have seen mediums who are working with the public who are absolutely terrible. And I have attended a public mediumship demonstration with a very famous celebrity medium, and it was absolutely terrible. And I would want to be known as in attendance or even interested in that kind of work. So I know that we have to develop ourselves to the best standard. The highest standard is very important because people are very savvy, and they're not going to believe someone who is trying to read them or pull wool over their eyes. It has to be very evidential. So I wanted to know more about the Skull group. Why was it shut down, and why hasn't it been replicated? Because there are physical mediums working right now. So why don't we have something like a Skull experiment going on right now?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. There's also, I'd like to address some of your earlier question simply by saying and acknowledging that genuine skepticism is very important. Being able to discern the real thing from the bogus. So I definitely honor your approach of being willing to immerse yourself in everything and then being able to winnow out what has integrity and what does not. As far as Skull is concerned, Skull was a very unique. It involved a confluence of very unique situations, both in terms of the people involved who had been working for a lifetime towards this, the geographic location of the main Skull experiment in the town of Skull. We are told the experiment was aided by. The Skull is located on a confluence of ley lines, which are said to be channels of energy in the earth. and that the physical layout that they had below ground, which tended to attenuate radio frequencies that kept natural light out of the cellar, and so on. It took a lot of perseverance, a lot of time. They sat for nearly a year before they got any phenomena. Now, I don't know anyone, myself, who would have the experience and the determination and the physical setup to make something like that work again. For all I know, it's happening 1,000 times already around the planet, but we don't. If it is, we don't know about it. So, and so I think an experiment of equal value would have to have its own character, its own nature, its own particular people and location and spirit team on the other side to make it work. My understanding of why the skull experiment was terminated, and I didn't get into this in the film because it's a whole other can of worms, and that is that because they began to experience interference. They had opened a channel, obviously, channel of communication, and at some point that channel became compromised. And so they were told at one point by the spirit team that we have to close the channel for your protection. And they were told that each of the couples could practice separately, but that the team of the two couples should not meet again, should not practice again. And it's unfortunate. And again, that's all I know about it. It may be that other experiments of this kind would have similar limitations. But I have to say that, the fact that they maintained this practice rigorously for 5 years, that it was so well monitored and so clean and so willing to be, they were so willing to invite guests from every walk of life in to come, see for yourselves. What the chances are of another skull experiment happening within our lifetime, I have no idea. It would be nice, but who knows? So I think the best we can do is simply to let people know about it and have it better known generally in the field.
Yes, thank you, Dan, very much. I love your answers, just marvelous. I think as far as materialism goes, if they could find a dollar value on the afterlife, we'd hear all about it. Everything's got a dollar value in this life. And then that will be terrible anyway. I've got a question. What does it mean, or what do you think it means when you read that some spirit people don't know how to communicate with us? They need a control to come through a medium, and some are good at it and others are not. I just want to know, what is it that they have to learn to get good at it? Would it be visualization? Because that could be one of the skills that they need. I'm a Rosicrucian, an Amok Rosicrucian, and visualization is one of the very first techniques that we're taught. So I'd like to have your comment on that.
Well, thank you. It's a good question, and I suppose you'd have to ask each individual on the other side what it is that they need to develop in themselves.
Yeah.
As far as visualization is concerned, yes, we are told over and over again that things like attention and intention are the keys to easy and healthy functioning on the other side. But it's also true here. Every act we take is preceded by an intention, and involves and intention and so on, which raises a whole other question of how in terms of our inner functioning, is the other side that much different from how it is for us? Maybe matters of degree more than matters of kind. I don't know. I can't speak for the other side just yet.
Oh, maybe though.
I promise that when I get there, I'll do my best. I'll do my best to check in.
I saw a dog yesterday waiting for its master at the supermarket, and he was sort of sitting there looking, and every now and then he'd wag his tail, but there was nothing to be seen, and the master didn't come. I'm wondering, is their sense limited to smell, or do they think of their master, and that makes them be tail waggy? I don't know. What do you reckon?
Well, they see things. They do see things.
Do they?
I'm sure they do. But the other thing, I think the most pertinent question is, do dogs think? That should be separate from the idea of, do dogs use language? Because we think of thinking in terms of our language. And the specific language is also going to affect how we think. I mean, anyone who speaks more than one language can tell you that concepts and perceptions don't always translate from one culture to another, from one language to another.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Like French is my second language, and I'm constantly amused by what can or cannot literally be translated from one to the other. And these are two, European languages. I had a housemate for a while recently who was Iranian. She's an Iranian MD who's studying for her United States certification. And she doesn't speak any other European languages other than English. And she's tried to teach me a little Farsi. And I'm a language freak, and I can read or understand some part of pretty much every European language. But something from a different language system, I'd have to learn it from scratch. And I think it's the same way between species, that you would, in some sense, have to be put in their shoes and experience what they experience, and perhaps realize that you can think without language as we think of it.
It's an emotion.
It's emotional or visual or olfactory or tactile, plus whatever senses our favorite pet may have that we have no conception of.
It's the hologram. Yeah. Good. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Enjoyed the chat, Daniel. I think my question is probably a little bit more simple than some of the stuff. I think it was in Wendy and Victor's group, which they carried a video of a woman called Louise Hamlin, who claims to be getting messages on WhatsApp. And I think you mentioned earlier that people and I was kind of annoyed. It was a lovely interview, but I was kind of annoyed because the interviewer never once said, well, what about the evidence, And I know you're evidence-based, and you didn't say once, have you still got the texts? And have they been analysed? And where do they, that kind of thing. Do you know about this case?
Yes, in fact, I watched the video last night.
Right, okay.
I found it very interesting and compelling and genuine. And I agree with you that that the interviewer, Alex, should have posed that question.
Yeah.
Technically, it may be easier or difficult to obtain that sort of evidence, but the least that she could have done would have been to do a screenshot of the WhatsApp messages. Whether that itself would prove anything, or whether that could be faked, I don't know. But I agree that when we encounter something that's potentially evidential, we should do whatever we can. Record, photograph, whatever's at hand. Engage a witness who might be close by, and so on. But we're not going to be able to prove everything, unfortunately. But
I think it may be that she did have this evidence and she just wasn't asked a question. So I have written to her, and maybe we will get an answer. She seemed a very erudite lady, and I can't imagine that she didn't consider this wasn't important.
Well, I imagine that, in her grief and in her desire to communicate and in her confusion about what was happening at the moment, that gathering evidence might have been the last thing on her mind.
Yeah.
I think that is probably true of a lot of people who start experiencing things that they can't compute immediately. And some people just are not accustomed to gathering evidence. This, some are, some aren't. So yes, I agree that question should have been asked, and I would be interested to know. And I agree that she was very. And I agree that she was a very interesting and genuine person, just really coming from here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheryl Page has just written in the chat. Cheryl, do you want to say something that you know somebody who's receiving messages from WhatsApp? I do also know someone who's receiving messages from WhatsApp, and will Cheryl, you there?
Can you hear me? Okay, Wendy, my camera.
Yeah, we
isn't...
can. That's okay.
I had done a reading for a woman in the UK, and she had very deep grief with regards to having lost her husband the year prior, and she was insisting that she wasn't getting any signs, and so I sort of coached her through how to broaden her awareness. And she called she called me back a couple of days later and said, I think I got a sign. I'm not sure it's a sign. Maybe somebody hacked my WhatsApp. But she had been sitting on the couch. She's 70, sitting on the couch with her adult son, and the other son, adult son, is across town. And so she's sitting watching the telly, and she gets a text from the son across town. And she's looking at the WhatsApp text, and she starts to type the message back to the son, and there is typing that starts to appear in the WhatsApp place where you would type the text. So she and her son sitting beside her are watching the message appear in WhatsApp, and something had happened in the garden the day before that she hadn't told the boys, and what it said was, I'm still a good Christian after the dark night. Yesterday in the garden with you was beautiful, and I love you. And she said to me, though, it was so funny because she said, it was all capitalizations and there was emojis, but there was no punctuation. Do you think it was Bernard? And she said, I know somebody could probably be outside my house hacking my WhatsApp. And I said, I don't think so, Kathy. I said, I suppose it's possible, but I don't think so. So.
Thank you. I wonder whether there is something about the programming code in WhatsApp that might make it a little easier for the other side to get through. So
that's a great thought, Dan. That's a really great thought.
I mean, I haven't heard of this happening with the built-in text apps on the iPhone, whatever. It may be happening, and we just may have happened to hear about the WhatsApp connection. But who's going to do the research on that?
Well, this is it. There's a lot of amazing things out there happening that are just not being researched and not being brought together. And it's only when you get Facebook groups or you get groups, and as Dan says, you ask the question. A lot of people are having amazing things happening with their computers. I've heard lots of people of having, music playing that wasn't on their computer, and things coming up, that were sort of like in the archives. And it seems our spirit friends love playing with technology. We know all about phone calls. I've had people who say they're talking to each other and a third person joins the phone call. And, it's just getting the evidence. It's actually pinning it down.
I have had this happen just through text messages. Vicki Talbot and I, a couple years ago, were texting about Seth, who we both had studied with Seth, Jane Roberts. And all of a sudden, we both got a symbol on our text message that someone had sent a audio message. So Vicki asked me, did you just send me something on audio? And I said, no. Did you send me something on audio? And she said, no. So I put my phone on speaker and recorded it into Audacity, and and it says, Seth. Hello, Seth. Here, I'm going to try.
Hello, Jack.
Let me try. Lily.
Yeah.
I keep messing it up. Let me try.
Yeah. Hello, Jack.
Did anyone did they come across?
We heard that, yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, so it was, and we were just, now, had I not recorded it in Audacity, I would have lost it, because then at some point we both lost that symbol on our text message. So I've had them through a lot of different devices, I think that they can.
Magic happened. It is happening. It's out there. And we hear about it all the time.
It's not a question, just something I think you may find interesting.
Please do. Sorry.
I have a blend of mental and physical mediumship, energy-based physical mediumship. We're having similar results to the skull experiment, and we're having direct voice and so on. But what's interesting is the team I worked with for many years, 2 days after my son passed, they sent me a voicemail. They phoned me. They used a living human's vocal tone, left me a message, a transmission for Tommy, who's my son, and they left a coded message for him. We now drop X. And I didn't that was 2 days after my son's accident. The following year, my son responded to them with a voice memo and spoke to me for the first time on my phone and titled it X. And that was his response to my team. And my phone is like a soul phone now. I have interactive communications, and so do many other people. It's what I do. And they calibrated my phone. They've told me, my team told me when they dropped that message for my son 2 days later, they were doing some sort of calibration. And what is happening now is just pretty amazing. And I get regular phone calls from my team, my son, you know, my mentor on the other side, who's a physical mental medium themselves, phone calls and voice messages. And there's many people in here that have had live conversations using the technology in my physical mediumship. It's, it's happening. I don't know what the conference was, but it's pretty cool. I'll leave it at that.
Well, just one quick response, Sally. Thank you. First of all, you mentioned I'd like to know more about the work you're doing. You also mentioned that you were doing energy-based physical mediumship, and that's what the Skull Group, I think, pioneered in, where there was no ectoplasm used at all, which of course is a fixture of traditional physical mediumship. But interesting to know who else is accomplishing physical mediumship without ectoplasm today. And apparently you've been doing
daylight. It's in daylight. There are several circle members sitting here tonight that experience the direct voice when we sit for my mediumship. It's different. Yeah, it's energy based and it's in daylight. So we sit in daylight.
Sally, we are so excited about what you're doing, and please keep us informed. Whenever you're ready to come and talk to us about it, we'd love to hear you. And we're thrilled to hear all of you. We keep asking all of your circle members who come to give us an update on what's happening, and they are very excited about that. Cheryl, just before we go, you've got a meeting this week. Cheryl is doing an amazing group called What If? And it's on every Tuesday. It's about this kind of stuff and about asking the questions and making investigations. Cheryl, can you just tell us the details of what time and everything else?
So it's the first Tuesday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern time, so do the math forward and backwards from there. But really, my journey into mediumship started just coming up on 6 years ago, and by other people's admission, my unfoldment was happening so quickly, and I think that part of that is trying to stay out of the boxes that were being offered and to just keep asking. Because I'm a scientist by training, I had to keep bringing myself back to the event horizon of what if. What if that's real? What if it's not? And like Dan was saying about sagacity, or being discerning, but not being cynical, and just asking those questions so that we begin to see that so much more is possible if we can stay in that place of possibility.
So I think any of you who are, the details of that meeting are in the Friday Afterlife report or in the Zoom mail out. And I think it's going to be a very, very exciting group under Cheryl's leadership. So with that, Dan, I know you've got to go. Thank you so much for being here. We've loved having you. Anytime you're ready to come back and tell us more, you have a big fan group here.
Thank you.
Wendy, how do we get the book?
The book, sorry, Dan?
Go to Amazon, and just type in my full name, Daniel Drasin. I'll take you right to the
Okay.
page. Or you can go to my website, dandrasin.com, and then click on New Science.
Thank you.
It'll take you right to the book.